Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our office hours today. We are going to chat about WorldShare ILL and circulation integration. So for most of you, we are done with the circulation data migration. We are finishing up this week with the last two. And so we'll start to think about that integration with circulation with the policies related to ILL. So I want to start with kind of a reminder, a refresher on the workflows for that integration. So I'm going to share that here in just a second, and then we're going to go through some of the setup pieces. I have a questionnaire that I will post in Basecamp that you can fill out. If you want to do the setup yourself, you are welcome to. If you'd like me to do it, you can fill out the questionnaire, and I will do that this week and next week. So one second, let me share my screen and we'll get started. We're going to start our slideshow from here. So just a reminder on the workflows of how the integration with WorldShare ILL and circulation work. Here's kind of a graphic representation of what the borrowing workflows look like. We'll go through each of the steps and indicate which are managed by the system as opposed to those that are handled by staff or patrons. But you'll see that there are 8 steps in the workflow, some of which are handled by the system and others that are handled by a person. But the first step is the request is initiated. Now, whether the patron requests the item directly through WorldShare or WorldCat Discovery, they will fill out the patron request form, log into their account, fill out the form, and submit it, and you'll get the request through WorldShare ILL. You can turn on buttons to allow patrons to do this depending upon how you want them to make requests. You can indicate that an ILL button only appears for items you do not own. So all of WorldCat would be open to those requests. So they can go out and search WorldCat and make those requests back to you. You can indicate that there's some sort of combination. You may have certain shelving locations that you don't lend to your users, but you would allow those items to be requested through ILL from another library. So while you might not loan out your copy of, To Kill a Mockingbird, I know that's kind of a silly example, but it's the first thing that came to mind. You might not loan out your copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, but the library across the street might, and you may request that item from there. So you can have those buttons appear for items that you wouldn't normally loan, but your users might need. The other option is for staff to initiate the ILL request, and they would do that directly in the WorldShare ILL interface. So you can be searching in WorldCat Discovery or in WorldCat and initiate the request from the specific item through there. In both cases, a patron barcode is required for the integration to work. So if you require the patron barcode on the request form, the patron will have to fill that part in. Their information should be identified as they log into the request form, but weird things have happened in the past. But you need to supply or verify that there is the patron barcode in the request to allow for the integration to work. The second step then is for staff to review the request. So they'll mediate that and decide whether or not to reject it or send it on to a series of lenders. You may already have the item, and so you would request the request and fulfill it through a hold request, or reject it for other reasons, or send it on to any lenders that you might work with. Once the item has been received from that lender, you'll enter in the item barcode for the ILL request. Now, through the integration configuration, it's recommended that you do set it up to use the WorldShare ILL request ID as the item barcode. And if you do that, it will automatically populate in the barcode box. So you won't have to type that in, it will automatically populate. This helps provide a match point between circulation and World Chart ILL. So it will create the temporary item in circulation using that ILL request ID as the barcode. Now, you don't have to use the request ID. You can use another item barcode. Maybe you have barcodes that you use at the desk specifically for this purpose, and you can use those as needed, but you will have to populate that information. So once you've entered a barcode into the request or utilized the ILL ID, request ID, you'll then mark the request as received. Now the system takes over from here and creates a temporary circulation record. These might be known to you as brief records in Sierra, but in WMS, we're creating temporary circulation records. These circulation records will allow the item to circulate. It doesn't appear in discovery or as part of your general collection holdings, but it will allow that item then to be placed on hold and to circulate. So once you've marked a request as received, it will prompt the system then to create that temporary item in circulation. You'll want to review the circulation history tab to make sure that that item was successfully created. So you'll see a status of that item that'll say temporary item either failed to create, and it'll tell you why. Typically, it's because either the patron barcode isn't included or it's wrong. There are some other reasons. There could be a configuration or a policy issue that could cause an item not to create. Those are ones then I'll have to help you investigate. But typically it's a success and it will create that temporary item. Once it's created the temporary item, it will place an active item level hold on the temporary item and attach it to the patron's account. So you'll just need to check their account and make sure that that has attached. The hold will then become visible in the patron's account in Discovery. Now, what's important to note, and I should have mentioned this on a previous screen, is when you're entering in the barcode, if you're initiating it, in the patron section for entering the patron information, it actually doesn't say barcode, it says ID. And so that's where you put the patron barcode. So for your users, because you're all using WorldShare ILL, you do not need to use any of the ILL fulfill fee data fields in the patron record. We're using the circulation information, so the patron barcode and the patron type that's associated with those records. All of those other ILL fields that you may see on the patron record are related to Tapasa, which is another ILL product that you could purchase. But for our purposes, we're using the patron barcode. Then the next step is for that item to be checked in at circulation. That's what's going to trigger the hold fulfillment. So while the temporary item gets created and the hold gets created on the patron's account and on the item, we need to trigger the hold for pickup and for notifications to go out. So then the item is checked in. The hold receipt is placed in the hold receipt is placed in the item, and then in the pickup, and the item is placed in the pickup location. This is going to also update the item status on the hold request. So it will change this over to ready for use, letting your patron know that that item is ready for them to come and check out. It updates their patron account both in circulation and in WorldCat Discovery. So if they were to log into their account, they would be able to see that information. This also generates the pickup notification. So that pickup notification currently in our current environment is generated and then delivered at the top of the hour. So here in Central Ohio, it's 10:10 a.m. If I were to trigger that now, the notification will go out to the patron at 11 a.m. Eastern. Now, here in the coming months, August, September timeframe, we'll be switching over to the next generation hold pickup notifications and hold notifications. So you'll be able to schedule those a little more granularly timeframe wise. So if you want them to go out a little sooner, you'll be able to indicate that. But for now, they go out at the top of the hour. Now, nothing stops a patron from seeing the hold being ready in Discovery. If they happen to log in and are checking their account, they would see that is already ready for them, and they can pick it up before the notification goes out if they're on campus or close by. Our patron comes to pick up the item, and we check it out to them. Just like you check out anything else to a patron account, you will then check out the ILL item. You'll use the request ID or whatever you're using for the barcode, enter into the barcode field in circulation, and adjust the due date as needed. Now, ideally, the policy that you have put in place for borrowed items is less restrictive than the due date that's been established by the lending library. So be mindful of that. So as you go through the questionnaire and you work through this, you might want to identify a longer time period to allow for the lending library's policies to be in place. But you can easily adjust the due date if it doesn't work out the way it should. Off our patron goes to use the borrowed item. They've used it for their 28 days or whatever it is that they have been given to circulate the item. They come back to the library to return it, and circulation staff will check the item in. They'll get the prompt at the top of the screen indicating that this is a WorldShare ILL request, so it needs to go back to the ILL team. It's then returned to that team. The status will automatically change the temporary item to unavailable, but it doesn't automatically delete it from the system. So that's something to keep in mind. It's a barcoded temporary circulation item, and it will appear on your circulation item inventory report as Circ managed. Those items can be retained for statistical purposes as needed, but once you're done, you can go in and individually withdraw them as needed. If you don't want to retain them for any period of time, you can automatically withdraw them or do it on a periodic basis. But just keep in mind, they will continue to appear on your circulation item inventory report until they're withdrawn from the system. Now, again, these items do not show up in Discovery. They're not part of your collection or part of your general holdings, but they are there in the background available to use. You can always search by that request ID for the barcode if you want to look at the details of the item. But in most cases, it's probably not something you need to retain. Then the last step in the lending process is to mark the item as returned. You'll go into WorldShare ILL, mark it as returned, ship the item back to the lender. And then once they've received it and checked it in, marked the request as complete, it will close out. You can then closed out requests are archived. The patron information is removed, but you can search that item by the request ID because you can search the request archives by the request ID. So that's why sometimes it's helpful to retain that information. And you can search that item by the request ID. So it does take out the step of having to create the temporary item and place the item on hold for the patron. So that integration will help with that process. Now, also, I want to remind you of the lending workflows for loans and copies. But for loans, this is a whole lot simpler if you turn on the full integration. The borrowing request comes in. So another library A, wants to borrow my copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. The request comes into WorldShare ILL. I review it and respond to the request. I can reject it and say, nope, I don't lend out that item. And it will then move on to the next library in the lender string that particular borrowing library has set up. Now, if I do want to lend out the item, I can then apply constant data. So if you have multiple physical locations that also manage ILL, we can set that information in so that you can change and adjust those the addresses for ship to and bill to and so forth. And we'll want to add the item barcode into the system. So you'll see the box in the on the screenshot that says item barcode. In this case, we're not going to use the request ID as the item barcode. We're going to use the actual item barcode on the item you're lending out. This is what's going to help trigger that integration because it's going to connect the item in your collection to a dummy account for ILL so it can check that item out. You'll save the request updates and select yes to lend that particular item. Oops, sorry, back. What's nice about the integration though here is we can turn on automatic checkout and check-in. So when I send the item through WorldShare ILL and I send it off to that borrowing library, once I have marked that item as yes, then the system will check it out to that generic WMS ILL account that I have created. I don't have to go into circulation and check it out. The system will do that automatically. Then once the item is returned to me and I mark it as checked in or complete in WorldShare ILL, it will automatically check the item back into WMS off of that generic account, and it will become available again, and you can put it back on the shelf. So it takes out a couple steps in the process if you choose to use that lending integration. I'm a big fan of it. It takes out some extra steps. It does, again, attach it to a generic WMS account. So if you are tracking who has those items, you will need to look at who has them borrowed through WorldShare ILL because it is checked out on a dummy account. But you can also decide not to turn on that extra piece of the integration and check the item out to a specific account created for those libraries that you lend to. That way you can have direct notifications sent out to their ILL team, as well as any charges that you might have. Otherwise, if you are managing it on the generic account, you will need to manage those notifications and any billing that might be associated with it directly with the library. Now, the copy workflow, if you've used that in the past in WorldShare ILL, it's going to be the same process. You receive the borrowing request and respond appropriately. If it's no, it moves on to the next library in the lender string. But if it is yes, then you'll be able to click on where it says article exchange. And you can attach a copy file that is saved on your computer. So either you can enter a URL or you can attach a file, click drop file, and then select yes to supply that particular item. Off it goes. The configuration will allow you to set parameters around that, how many times it can be opened or how long they can have it. And then once that time period is ended, it deletes off of their space. They no longer have access. I really like the lending integration. I think it's quite, oops, I went too far with my closing out. I think it's very helpful through the process. Looks like we have a question. Are you still working on a document that addresses WSCAT borrowing? We have talked about the WSCAT borrowing in the past. You will still need to manage those requests through autographics. That doesn't have an impact in what you're doing within the integration for WorldShare ILL and circulation. So one thing to keep in mind, you will need to check those items out, either using that dummy ILL account or an account you've created for those users that you'll be lending through your WSCAT. Now, for the circulation integration questionnaire, this questionnaire will go over some things related to configuration. Specifically asking for shelving location information. Many of you included an ILL location as part of your data migration process, and we can still use that ILL shelving location. So no matter what you called it, interlibrary loan or ILL, we can use that location for the integration process. You may have an existing generic account that we could use, or I can create one for you, or you can create one. It's completely up to you. And we can also add notifications for up to 5 email addresses when a borrowing request has been filled using Article Exchange, a borrowing request has come in and is unfilled, or any new lending requests arrive. So you can indicate those so staff members can get those notifications. And they are pretty timely. They come in quite quickly. Then there's a section covering borrowing, asking what you want to use for the barcode for that temporary item. So the request ID, which is recommended, or you want to use the lender's barcode or something else. How long do you allow patrons to have an ILL item on loan, or do you go by the, sorry, I just went blank. Oh, from the lender, the time period from the lender. Do you have multiple physical locations where patrons can pick up your ILL items? So for those of you with branches, do you allow those to go out to the branches? And they can indicate that on the request form. And then some of these are going to relate to holds as well. So we set up some hold policies for when items have to be picked up by before they expired. Is that the same as you have for regular items, or do you have a longer period for hold items to remain on the shelf for ILL? Especially since there may have been a cost involved, or it's something that you don't want to expire too quickly before they can pick it up. Are there different loan periods for different patron types, for different item types? Will you allow your users to renew ILL items? And I think most importantly, do you charge any fees related? So do you charge overdue fees for ILL items? Do you charge any standing fees? Do you charge for replacement costs for items you've borrowed from another library? Then the next section covers lending. Do you want the system to automatically check items out and check items in for you? What is the time period for items that you loan to other libraries? Do you want overdue notices for circulation to go to an ILL department? This would require you to use a specific account for each location you lend to versus utilizing the integration at the top. And when do you consider an item long overdue when it's been loaned out to another library? Then this last section is about fees. Do you charge your patrons for using your ILL services? Oops, there's a no in there. That shouldn't be there. Some libraries automatically charge a fixed bill for any time that an item is checked out. So when do you assess that fee? When they place the request, when it's shipped, when they receive, when it's checked out. We can build that into the policy if it's at checkout, if you charge a $10 fee for any ILL requests. And do you charge the same amount? Do you have different charges for loans or copies? Different charges for patron types or material types? And do you want to charge your patrons the replacement cost for those items if they're long overdue or not returned? And then finally asking about, do you want to bill the patron a processing fee when an ILL is considered long overdue? This information will help me set up that integration. So again, if you choose to have me set it up, please fill this out and save it to Basecamp, and I'll be able to quickly enter this information and get it set up. You are welcome to do the setup yourself, utilizing the slides that we went over previously. It does walk through the integration setup process of what needs to be added, but it may be just as easy or quick for me to go ahead and do it for you if you would like. Now, as I mentioned, going back to the previous question about the WISCAT group, that is all handled through Autographics. There is a setup process to bring your catalog information over into Autographics, which Melody is handling, and I have more information, Melody, for you. But for this process, this is anything you handle through WorldShare ILL. So anything that's going through the WISCAS process, you'll manage it the same way you have in the past. You'll still need to check those items out in circulation as you lend them through the WISCAT group. So this will be for any lending and borrowing that you do with other libraries outside of that group. Katie asked if we choose not to use the integration, would we still need aspects of this form for setup? If you choose not to use the integration, there is nothing else that you need to do except for maybe make changes to the request form if you'd like. The request form is set up in a default way. Let me show you what that looks like. Now, with the integration setup, I will not make changes to the request form, but you are welcome to do so. Let me go back to sharing my screen, sorry. But other than that, there's not anything else you would need to do for setup. That is in service configuration under WorldShare ILL. And you'll be able to see request forms. And there's the WorldShare ILL request form. And by default, it is set up with certain parameters in place. There's a section for the bibliographic information with which if a patron is placing this request through Discovery will automatically fill because they're pulling it specifically from the WorldCat record. You can reorder these fields. You can remove fields. You can make some required, some editable as needed. You can change the field labels as needed, but you'll see those in the drop down. Then there's a section for patron information. As the patron logs in, this information should populate, but you'll be able to provide some information about their request. So what they need, whether it's a loan or a copy, if they need it by a certain date, you can make that required as needed. Then the personal information about the patron is in the second section, and you can edit and change that information as well. So here for the field label, let me zoom in just a little bit. Oh, that didn't help. Here you'll see for the patron ID, maybe barcode might be more appropriate for your students, or student ID or campus ID, whatever makes sense for your users. And if you don't think your patrons know their ID numbers, you could make this not required, but you will have to make sure it's filled in for the integration if you're choosing to use that. So really, if you choose not to use the integration, you can come in and update the request form if you want. Otherwise, you can leave it with the defaults in place, and you can turn it off as needed. As you fill this out, you can hit the preview button, and it will show you what it looks like in its active form. So which fields are required with the little asterisks and the breakdown of those different sections. Kim added for those that she has set up the integration and it is slick. I like to hear that. I think it's really, really easy to use. For your WisCat loans, she set up a fake WisCat patron account, create the temporary records for the items to check them out, like in Sierra, and then notices go to our ILL email address so ILL staff can forward them to the library if they want. So great, thank you for that additional information for the WisCat process. So that won't change as much, but for the integration with your other lending, that will be helpful as you move forward. Let's see, Sam asked a question as well. When we check out borrowing ILLs, is it sometimes using the due date and sometimes using a more restrictive due date? Where in service config can we change that? So that's going to be based off of the loan. So if you have an ILL loan that we've applied to, that will be under WMS circulation, under loans. And depending upon what we called that particular loan when I set it up for your library, I have an ILL with a fee loan, you would be able to edit that particular loan policy to extend it. So for example, here, my ILL loan is for 30 days. If you want to make sure that you're getting and catching the due date coming from that lending library, you might expand this to 60 days. So again, it's going to use the most restrictive. We do have to put a loan period in here, but if you want to utilize the due date coming from that library, something less restrictive in the policy will be helpful for utilizing that particular loan time period coming from the library. Great question. Yeah, no problem. That's why it's inconsistent. So for those of you, again, as you are begin using it and we set up the integration, that's something to note is that if you have a really restrictive policy for your ILL in circulation that we've configured, then it is going to be more restrictive. It's going to take the most restrictive policy. That's just the way the system is set up. At this time, we don't have the ability to say always look at the lending library due date. But if you're more generous with your policy, that way we can make sure that we're using that due date coming from the lender. Great questions. All right, take a moment and see if anyone else has any additional questions. Next week will be our last office hours together. We're going to talk a little bit about some things for you to watch for as you continue to do cleanup, things that you'll want to make sure that you share with me. I'll be able to begin in the next week looking at any issues that may have come up for you during data migration so that we can get those fixed. And then also talking about what you'll begin to transition over to support in the coming weeks. So that's what we'll cover next week. If you do still need to meet after next week, we can always set up one-on-one time, or I'll stay in contact with Melody to see if maybe we need an additional office hours in July. But I don't want to take up too much of your summertime. I know folks will be wanting to go on vacation, and some of you may have some institution breaks that are coming up. So next Tuesday will be our last session together. And it's been such a great time working with all of you. So I look forward to continuing to work on things. But if you want to do the ILL setup, I will get that posted in Basecamp here in the next few minutes. And then as soon as the recording is available, I'll post that as well. I don't see any additional questions coming in, so I will go ahead and say goodbye for today. I appreciate everybody's time and attention, and look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks, folks.